So we spent some time talking about the financial sheets and which are statements, which ones are important. And I think for a lot of people, we don't like math. And for a lot of people, and I know this was true for me, I actually had this delegated to people when my business really started going.
Yeah.
And then the interesting thing I learned was it's not really hard math. It's really, accounting is not as much math, and there's a few ratios to calculate in finance, but it's not really hard math. It's more understanding what's going on in my business.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really understand how important that was till I had to replace an office manager, and I had to play that role for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I found out where money was going and why are we spending so much money on this? And it really started to become meaningful for me. And it was that insight that when I started to talk to potential funders about my business, that I really could speak about, well, here's what's going on in my business. What I'd like to talk a little bit about now is we've got a business plan. Our idea has been kind of fleshed out. We have a sense for how these numbers are going to work. Where do I go from here if I'm a startup? Because I remember somebody telling me when I first said, all right, got my business plan, I'm going. They said, Ben, you realize banks don't lend you money when you need it. Yeah. You have to be in good shape to go get money from banks. Where do you go get, well, how do we do this funding?
So let me answer one of the first things you noted before we get into the funding is we have to remember financials tell a story, right? And we have to understand what that story is as a business owner or someone looking for funding, or else there'll be a presumption from the bank or other investors what the story is. So it is extremely important for you to understand the numbers. You may have a bookkeeper, you may have your CPA who is doing the bookkeeping for you, right? But sitting down and having them explain it to you so you can tell your financial story is extremely important. So when it comes to funding, and here's the thing, most people say, well, I'm just going to go to a bank. The bank issues debt, right? You have to differentiate between debt and equity, especially as a startup, right? Debt is something, is a note that you're going to repay, right? That could be a debt from your parents, from family members, from friends, right? That says, hey, I'm going to lend you this amount of money and you're going to pay me back principal and interest under these terms, right? You have to pay it back. There's been a lot of advantages in using debt in sort of the lower interest rate environment, being able to, from a standpoint of just debt, you're not giving up ownership, right? Equity is you giving up ownership, right? That's you going to a partner or a friend and saying, hey, I need 50 grand, I'll give you 50% of my company. So there's a trade-off between the two. When you're a startup, when you're a young entrepreneur and you're getting things started, oftentimes there's very limited options. And that's the truth. When I look at it when I've seen a lot of startups from an equity standpoint, that's finding someone who's willing to invest, a partner, someone with maybe knowledge in the industry or someone who has a financial background. It could be friends and family, right? Money, friends and family, yeah, we'll invest in your company. We believe in it. From a debt perspective, oftentimes you see it, and this is just the nature of startup funding, is credit cards. A lot of times people will use their own personal credit cards, or people will own a house and they'll have equity in their house and they'll take out equity from their house. That's still considered debt because you're borrowing it from the bank just personally and then you're putting it into the company. So there is this frustration, and I do see this often in talking with entrepreneurs and startups and saying, well, where do I go for my lending sources? Well, there are organizations that can help and facilitate, right? We've talked about one before, the SBA, right? SBA.gov. And that gives you a very good idea of what is available. And depending on your industry, depending on your brand, things of that nature, there may be some startup funding there. But you wouldn't get overly excited because banks typically are looking to lend when you have a track record, when you have 1 or 2 years of positive cash flow and they say they can repay the debt. And it makes sense because why would someone lend you money if you don't have any track record that you can pay it back? Then ultimately you would say to the bank, why would you lend me this money? I didn't show I had any types of revenues and I couldn't repay you, right? So you have to differentiate between equity and debt and then figure out what are those initial sources and what do they look like. Now, one thing you and I had talked about, and I'll just mention it now, is the importance of networking. right? The importance of networking, being out at chamber events, being part of industry groups or industry conferences, networking with CPAs, attorneys. Those are all groups and individuals that generally have access to capital, right? They know somebody who's a private investor. They know an institutional business or company that wants to invest in your type of company. So if you're not out there networking, it may be very difficult to find those funding sources that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I know in our area in particular, networking is probably more important than anywhere I've ever been.
Yeah.
It's how things get done in Western North Carolina. And in our networks, it's interesting, you'll start to find overlapping circles. And then when you find that overlap, there's the meat to really go after, because the relationships are built from, oh, here you are, see you again. It's Tuesday morning, not Thursday morning. And you start to run into people from the chamber, from business associations, from different circles that you not only make friends with them, but you're starting to make friends with their friends because they're talking to them about you. So you're fanning out in your community the number of connections your organization has. Yeah, really important.
And it's also knowing that you're at different stages in the company and there's different resources depending on your stage. Right? Yes, the truth is there's more access to capital if you're a larger company. Right? The public, the private markets, you have a lot more access to capital and grow. Sometimes that's a frustration. But there are a lot of circles that once you start to sort of get within those circles, getting introductions, like you said, from the chamber and others, where there's angel investors, there's venture capital, right? As long as you have sort of this proof of concept, sometimes it's just your intellectual property, right? You've invented or you've created something that people think is a tremendous idea, right? And talking with those individuals that can help support you. Oftentimes entrepreneurs, and I see this on the financial aspect, they think they have to know everything, right? From a legal, financial, find the right partners. Those partners will be tremendous resources, and ask others how they did it. There's always like larger companies I've always found in a network, business network, they want to share their story and they want to help. They want to pay it forward.
Yeah, particularly if you go outside of your particular market, you can even talk to somebody who's doing the same thing.
Oh yeah.
You're not competing with them anymore, and entrepreneurs like to tell their story, and they like to help other entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And there's a lot of investors out there looking to put money to work. So if you're at a chamber event and you're having a conversation, you're doing your elevator pitch, and somebody, is very interested in what you're doing, and you sit down with them, they could become one of your investors or a business partner doing a private loan. I'll give an example. I have a company that I've worked with for years, and it was a great product to disrupt this industry. It was eco-friendly, and they went ahead and he, through a friend of a friend, was introduced to this individual that was just interested in this new product that could disrupt it. Well, he did have a couple $100,000. He was able to lend to the company. The company's now, doing well over close to 30 million in revenue today. And that was just an introduction of someone who said, I'm interested in that kind of idea and the trends of it. I'll go ahead and make an investment.
And in addition, in these networks that you were talking about, and we've talked about this before, there's groups like SCORE and Small Business Center and others that are business oriented. We have Mountain BizWorks in our particular area that they not only have resources and education and training, they have funding. So you can really put all these together.
And those organizations attract people who have sold businesses and are considered high net worth individuals, and they want to invest in smaller startup companies. It attracts that profile of former owners.